Okay, thank you very much. So Max and Augusto, they talked a lot about structures now. So I will do this as well a little bit. And then I want to like get to reactivity, but you'll see this in a second. So like basically, I mean, you probably saw all kinds of this graphic. So what you want to do is you want to take like really, really abundant molecules like H2O, CO2, maybe take renewable energies, maybe wise electrocatalysis, upgrade them. Then you want to add additional reactions, and then you want to get to really valuable chemicals. And you do this by heterogeneous catalysis. And to get these heterogeneous catalysts, we really need innovative materials, but we also have to understand the catalytic mechanism at the atomic level. So to do this, we can use like operando methods, which are quite challenging. So there's a lot of development on that. But what we do like a new approach, or we try to do it, and to also tackle like the different topology of heterogeneous catalysts. And we want to do it like, which is like depicted here very schematically. So you have your catalyst, your heterogeneous catalyst, and we want to see the clusters as surface cutouts. And what makes this a little bit viable is that in like actually bond breaking and bond making, they're really confined to local sites. So you need like 1 or 2 atoms where you break the bonds, where you make the bonds, and actually clusters can be this. So how we want to get there, or like what are like examples? So you can do like, there's like gas phase reactions that show this. This is like the CO oxidation to CO2 on a copper aluminum oxide cluster, which was mass selected. Or there are also DFT calculations on the NOCO reaction, which is important for 3-way catalysts, where you also have like actually this dicopper oxide as a cutout on the surface, on an aluminum, like a gamma alumina surface. And this was DFT calculated, and it works. So kind of literature also shows that using cutouts is viable and works. And yeah, now I wanted like just to get you introduced to that. And like now that there was a lot of, like in Augustus talk about that nickel gallium cluster, I wanted to show you like the experimental results a little bit. So actually this is has a long story, this cluster, and it started to be called nickel 8 gallium 6 in our group. And it's like existing for kind of 15 years now. And it's really, really hard to solve it. And because the crystal structure is really bad. But then we did mass, lithium S from this cluster. And what you see when you zoom into it, you see that you have 3 different clusters, and they're all cold crystallized. So you already see you have this CP star 6 shell, and then you have 13 or 14 metals in there, as Augusto already said. And obviously they co-crystallize. It's like in the same manner that the copper zinc structure of Max does it. So by X-ray structure, by X-ray it's really hard to determine between nickel and gallium, and if it's so disordered, you have almost no chance, or you have actually no chance. So then we did mass, and this was a really, really big step for us, that we like recognized we have 3 compounds in there. So now it's not nickel 8 gallium 6 any longer. It's like these 3 classes, and then obviously we ask ourselves, how does this cluster really look like? And what we also saw in the mass before is that when we used like the common parameters to change this, it's like we ask, can we like get like one cluster very pure and then do a crystal structure? Sadly, no, as you can see there. But so we applied the common parameters like temperature, equivalence, reaction time. We all like changed it, and you saw nothing really working. But when you change the reactants, then it works. And we have to admit, we don't know really why, but when you use like a common nickel olefin precursor, like nickel COD2 or nickel CDT, then you get more of the nickel 6 gallium 7 cluster. But when you use one there's already gallium attached, and the DVDS, which is another olefin ligand, then you see the nickel 7 gallium 6 cluster, which is like better, or where you have more in it. So this is really like kind of uncommon, that you cannot influence reactions by stoichiometry or these common parameters. So this also tells us that we have really these stability islands Max was talking of, and also Augusto mentioned them. So like nature and thermodynamics, they really give us, there is a sink, and you can only get to that, and it's really, really hard to change that. Well, so now we wanted to get from the elemental composition to the structure, and the only thing we knew is that we have this CP star 6 shell, octahedral, and this was quite good. The resolution was quite good. I think also Augusto said it when you ask, did you change the ligands in the calculations? So the ligands are usually, they're really like on a fixed point, and they're quite good. The resolution is quite good. And then we could also say like all the time to such a ligand, to such a CP star, there's one metal attached. So this was quite good as well. But then the inner core, this was really of high disorder. So, but what was good was that we got one good crystal structure, and there we could see the difference. The CP star centroid distance to the metal is really like decisive. So the distance can tell you a lot about the metal. And for gallium, it's typically 2.0 angstrom, while for nickel, it's 1.8 angstrom. And so we could see that we have like rather, we have, I think, 1.75 angstroms in the crystal structure. So this was a good like point to say, well, maybe nickel is there. Then we also did 13 carbon solid state NMR experiments. And there we also saw a typical shift for nickel CP star, and gallium CP star would have another shift. So this was also quite clear. But obviously to eventually to determine it, we needed Augusto and Schuer's help for DFT calculations. And this is something I performed before, just to show you the structures. Well, what is the difference actually? See here, this bare nickel, and there, this bare gallium. Right. So now what we see here actually is we see a CP star transfer. And thinking back to that catalysis point is that usually CP star transfer kind of, it goes to the transition metal, which is the active metal in catalysis. So usually gallium will not do a lot of catalysis, but obviously nickel does it. But when you change it from a molecular point of view, you get the CP star to the nickel, then you'll have a nickel 1. And usually nickel 1 is not very active. Actually, it's not active for most of the catalysis. So we identified in this case that CP star transfer is like quite a big problem, especially when we want to get to reactivity of our clusters, as I showed you before. And yeah, that's the thing. So Max already introduced you to that living library. I will just skip it. So you all saw the mass spectra, right? So this is again the CP star transfer. It's very common for iron. So we have like the good blue CP star, and when you react it, you get a bad CP star that's attached to a transition metal. And here it's the same on the bottom. There it's a quite interesting compound because it has both. It has a CP star on the gallium and the CP star on the nickel. So it can be kind of seen as kind of an intermediate on the way to that bigger nickel gallium cluster. So what we said, we have to really overcome that CP star transfer. And there are some ways to do that. So we can replace CP star by another ligand, by an alkyl ligand, which should be harder to transfer from the gallium to the transition metal. Or we can say, well, CP star makes nice clusters. So we have like, in the last 15 years, we had a lot of clusters. Why just not kick off the CP star, cook a cluster with CP star, and then kick it off, and then create reactive sites there? So well, let's go to the replacement of the CP star. This ligand over there, this supersilide ligand, is well an alkyl, and it's also quite bulky. So it should protect the cluster that it cannot agglomerate. So actually, when you look at CP star, there you have the CP ring with filled p orbitals, and they donate into the p orbitals of the gallium or the aluminum of that E metal. In case of the transition metal, you also have D metals. So this is like MTD apples, D orbitals. So this is the case for nickel 1. There you can donate into them. Even for iron, even better, even more. So that's probably the reason why we see such a common CP star transfer on iron, but also nickel. And when you go to this supersilyl ligand, then you have rather a sigma bond, and this should hopefully not be so relevant for the transition metals. So we hope to avoid the transfer there and get more transition metals that are available for reactivity. Well, and for this, we expect that we only have neutral compounds, so covalent compounds, and we can like create living libraries and then detect them by LiftDMS. So this is quite important for us, the way how we monitor our compounds that we have in solution. Then we could do hydrogenolysis, or we could do like oxidation or proteolysis of the ligands, of the CP ligands. And like on the first impression, these two compounds you see down there, they look quite different. Well, you have, in one case you have ruthenium and the other one platinum, but well, they are both quite expensive and transition metals. So, well, and they are connected by naked gallium. You have some hydrides on them, but obviously what you can also see is the charge. So this makes a really huge impact. It will also make an impact on reactivity, but also how to analyze them, but I'll come to that now. So basically we start here, we have a CP star somewhere located at a transition metal or on an E metal. And when we add hydrogen, we cleave off CP star H, and we get to something like this. Probably the hydride will be attached to the transition metal, but maybe it's also at the E metal. That's not so important actually. And then we want to try to create libraries of metal like clusters with hydrides on them, because hydrides, they're quite promising to react with substrates. So you have a reactive site, you can do insertion reactions, all kind of reactions. And so one thing that I will now do in my PhD is try to create such libraries and also monitor them by LiftDMS. So it's really like we don't know yet for sure that we can see hydrides in the mass, or if we can see like the real compound. Maybe, for example, like in here, you have them cis standing. So this could eliminate when you ionize the compound, and then you don't really see the pure compound. So what I will want to do first is resynthesize this guy and then measure, and then to start measure reaction solutions and see if I can create libraries like Max does. And then we have the ionic case where you can add like an acid, and then you can create something like this, which has a counter ion and is an ionic compound. So what is now the big difference? For the left one, we need LiftD. For the right one, we need ECMS. So ECMS is it's still a soft ionization method, but for our clusters, it's probably quite harsh. So we'll also have to like play a lot with our instrument, see if it's possible at all, maybe change up a little bit the hardware, build a kind of a new chamber where you like ionize these compounds, and then we'll see. However, same thing there, I want to create libraries there, create many compounds, and then what is maybe now interesting for you, I want to add some like relevant substances like CO2, methane, and see is there a reaction going on, and then also monitor it by mass. And then obviously depending on the parameters, like do some size focusing maybe, and eventually like monitor one reaction, especially in the mass. And then also we are obviously open for other methods, like let's see, X-ray analysis or NMR. But in the end, probably we will need DFT calculations to get a real insight on the molecular level, what's going on there and whatnot. Right. So just because easy is really tough, I wanted to give you like a small outlook where I'm at the moment. There is also like an old cluster. It's a platinum gold cluster. So it's more stable like to air and water. So I think it's not completely stable on air and water, but it's surviving definitely easy. And it's a platinum gold XY. Again, you cannot distinguish between gold and platinum by single crystal XRD. And it's an icosahedral cluster with one central atom, so 13 atoms in total. And this one is charged. So you see the counter ion is gallium Cl4. And So what you can see is, well, I can like really get this gold 10 platinum 3 cluster. I can see it. The other one is still not really so easy to identify because the isotopic patterns, they overlap. So I'm still working and figure out on it. And that's also a very young result. So I just got it, I think, a week before I left to Brazil. But what is nice that actually this gold 10 platinum 3 cluster would be a superatom from the electronic count, would be an 8 electron superatom. And what is also interesting is that we thought for a long time it's gallium Cl4, the counter ion, but now we also see gallium Cl3 Cp star as a counter ion. So we now gained probably one elemental composition, and what EASY also shows us are the counter ions. And this can also tell you things about the reaction mechanism and whatever, right? So, and what we also learned, if I do a measurement in dichloromethane, I don't see this gallium Cl3 Cp star. If I do it in a acetonitrile, I will see it. So it's like the conditions you apply, they're really, really like decisive for the results you get. So we are just like learning how to deal with our new mass machine, and yeah. So at the end, I want to generate active sites at these clusters by rather replacing the ligand or cleave it off. Yeah, tackle the CP star transfer, and then we have to develop the methodology for like the covalent neutral case and for the ionic case, and therefore we like lift EMS and also easy EMS. And then afterwards, when we created these active sites, we want to do the substrate interactions. So I think at the moment we have to admit we don't have a big plan which substrate we're going to use, but we're quite open for it. And because we've never done it before, we just have to check, will our clusters rather react with very polar substrates like CO2 or with rather unpolar substrates like methane? And what we're doing for that, so gases are obviously like very interesting, but they're also hard to handle in a lab. So we just build up a new line where we can dose gases on like that we can only add like 1 or 2 equivalents of CO2, because Max did some pre results on this copper aluminum cluster with CO2. And if you add like 1 bar of CO2, which is like equivalent to, I don't know, in the molar scale 100 times of CO2, then it just decomposes. So we're now like building up that we can add like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 equivalents, for example, of CO2, or maybe even of oxygen, was what will definitely kill our clusters. But then we can maybe discover like an decomposition process or something like this. Yeah. So I want to say thank you, obrigado, and yeah.